and break off into our second segment, which is going to be talking about Chris Paul, or if you're aware of the NBA meme, Rajon Rondo. Only people who aren't casuals are going to get that joke. But regardless, Chris Paul comes off the bench for Golden State. Recently, however, he's been through an injury, so he hasn't been in the rotation as much as he was previously, or like at all. But when Chris Paul is the type of player, like, he's one of those great, like, his longevity can be rivaled with LeBron James, in my personal opinion, because Chris Paul he's been the same, like, I wouldn't really say like the same, like, in terms of production, but he's been like that same player. Like, no matter what, Chris Paul can always bring value to a team. That's what I've noticed watching him play through all of these years. When he was on the Hornets, when they were from New Orleans, the New Orleans Hornets or something like that, and he was arguably like their best player, and like he would the impact that he would bring with his points and his assists, and how elite he is at running the pick and roll is astonishing. And it definitely, like, a lot of people were inspired by his game in the pick and roll, because he has this mid-range that he loves to shoot from the pick and roll that it goes in like 9 out of 10 times every time I see him play. And through that mid-range shot, because we all know that mid-range shot is sort of dying, he's been thriving in this league. Like, every single time he comes off the screen, since the center believes he's going to, like, take a layup because he's really good at finishing the ball, he shoots the mid-range, since like 9 times out of 10 it's always open, and he is so automatic from there. And it doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter if it's Chris Paul on the Suns, if it's Chris Paul on the Clippers, if it's Chris Paul on the Warriors now, it's automatic. And he's that type of player that, like, with that longevity, has been able to bring value to his team on the offensive side of the ball, and is able to lead them to regular season wins. Now, I say regular season wins because despite everything that I said about Chris Paul, he is arguably one of the most notorious playoff chokers in NBA history. And he's one of those chokers, and, like, it really, like, no disrespect whatsoever when I, like, call him that, but it's like it's true. It's like he's lost several series when he should have won. He was part of the Clippers blowing a 3-1 lead the first time, not the second time. And he's also like had the most 2-0 leads blown in recent memory. He blew a 2-0 lead in the finals against the Milwaukee Bucks, and that was the most recent time. And that was the only time he's been close to winning a championship. Every other time, he's only ever made it to the second round or get eliminated in the first round. Except for when he was on Houston that one year in 2018, where he went down with an injury in arguably the most important game of the entire series. And this is sort of like what I mean by him being like a choker. And while his numbers in the playoffs aren't bad, he's one of those players that it's like you could just tell. And, like, his numbers don't translate to, like, him being bad in the postseason. It's just you could just tell. I mean, a 2-0 series lead blown here, getting injured in the playoffs here, blowing a 3-1 lead here, scoring only 12 points in one game here in an elimination game. Game 7 against on OKC, only scoring like 10 points or something like that against the Houston Rockets. He did not have a great game against that Houston Rockets, and he didn't show up. And he's had that tendency of just not showing up on the biggest stage. But with that out of the way, like, I'm not talking about the playoffs. Right now we're talking about the regular season and what he could do on the Golden State Warriors. Now, people didn't really like this fit I think this is like a great fit because Chris Paul is like, he's a fantastic point guard. He's a great point guard. And Chris Paul's playmaking combined with Klay Thompson and Steph Curry coming off the ball and running screens and like flares and all that stuff, it's just a recipe for disaster because Chris Paul will know where to put the ball and when to put the ball in the spot that Steph Curry needs to score. And I feel like that's something that Draymond does relatively well, while at the same time setting screens. But now they have two players to do that. So, and not only that, but Chris Paul can also operate the pick and roll just in case things aren't going like the team's way or they need to get a basket. Like, that's a reliable shot to go to. And an interesting dynamic that I'm thinking about right now is Chris Paul and Klay Thompson coming off of the bench. And that might prove to be like a very competent duo. Like Chris, again, like I said earlier, like running the flare screens and running like off-ball screens with Steph Curry and Klay in the lineup. But now this time, it's just Klay in the lineup. So I feel like this could be really good, a really good lineup for the Golden State Warriors. And I think maybe they should stick with Klay Thompson coming off the bench to help Chris Paul and that bench. Not that Chris Paul needs help with the bench, obviously, but that would give him some more firepower. Granted, even though like Klay Thompson hasn't really been himself recently in a lot of these games, it doesn't matter because Chris Paul, he's the type of player that makes his teammates better. So I have a feeling that maybe with Chris Paul back in this lineup, and with how Klay Thompson he's been a little bit shaky coming off the bench, but he's also had his moments when he was off the bench. So I have a feeling if Chris Paul's in that lineup and helps him be as consistent as he can be, I have a feeling that we might see like the return of Headband Klay, Game 6 Klay, all of those nicknames, third quarter Klay, all of those nicknames that Klay Thompson has, because those names are derived from some of the best games that he's had as a player where he just couldn't miss a single shot. So with Chris Paul coming off the bench, do I think that the Warriors have a better chance of making it to the playoffs as opposed to making it in the play-in? Absolutely. And I think that they could go, so far, like they've been playing really well, so they could go on a really nice win streak. And that could put them in a good spot, really high in the playoffs because of how close the Western Conference is in records with everybody else in the standings. I'm just going to pull up the standings right now, and it looks like the Warriors they're 10th, meaning they hold the last spot in the play-in. But the game difference between 10th and fifth is 3 games, meaning if they win 3 and either one of those guys like loses, then they're all the way up in the 5th spot of the playoffs. So it's all about playoffs are all about matchups, and it's all about it's also about who can get home court advantage first most of the time. Sometimes, because home field advantage in the playoffs is extremely underrated, in my opinion, to some people. And, obviously, people think that. People think that, oh, it's a home, it's they're away, so it's they're obviously going to have this advantage. But, it's way more apparent than that. It's the difference between playing in a playoff game versus playing in a regular season game. Not to mention, the fan noise being different in both of those types of games. It's a completely different story. And some players might be able to handle the pressure in the regular season, but they might not be able to handle the pressure because it's a playoff game. But that's what separates the great players from the elite players. And the elite players are the players that can turn it up whenever they need to, no matter what. And that obviously, that's the difference. But I think that these Golden State Warriors could hold a spot in the playoffs. They definitely have a better chance of doing that than the Lakers, in my personal opinion. And with that in mind, they might make it to like the 5th or the 6th seed, where we will see them in the postseason matching up against. Let's see, who would they match up against if they would take the 5th? They probably match up against the Clippers or Denver, which, depending on how you feel, that might be a death sentence. Like, both of those teams are really, really good. So honestly, they might be better off if they try and get. They might be better off if they just try and get the 7th seed or the 8th seed. Like, I understand that they, unfortunately, like, I understand, like, they have to play playing games in order to, like, get those. But if the T-Wolves and the Thunder stay in the top 2 spots, I feel like those would be the teams that you'd want to go up against in the first round, because the Thunder, especially the Thunder haven't made the postseason in a while. We don't know how Shai is going to play in the postseason. And I feel like that lack of experience, similar to how they beat Sacramento, is going to be their downfall. But with that, we are out of time for this second segment, so join in for the third segment, where I give a quick recap of all of the NBA games that went down last night. So I will be right back after this short break.